Americans need to have a serious conversation about what Taiwan means to the United States. Because we're dealing with an issue here that could end up in war with a nuclear power. And if you're going to go to war with the Chinese over this issue, it had better be a vital interest of the United States, critical to U.S. security and well-being. It does not meet that bar. Taiwan is a war or peace issue for the Chinese. Taiwan is a vital interest for the Chinese government. It is an issue over which they will go to war. By all best estimates, a really major destructive war, a magnitude of destruction in life and property and in disruption of the international system that goes beyond anything that we've really seen since World War II. Up to $10 trillion, 10% of global GDP could be wiped away. You could have deaths in the many thousands on both sides. There could be a loss of many thousands of lives on the American side, at least, in just a period of 2 to 3 weeks. These are arguments about why Taiwan is a vital interest for the United States. All three of these arguments are, in my view, inadequate. The first one is a strategic argument. It's a critical strategic location, the loss of which would put the United States at a huge disadvantage in Asia and would allow China to dominate the region and thereby eventually possibly dominate the United States, kind of like a domino effect. Second argument is American credibility. Confidence that allies have in the United States coming to their defense if they were under threat. The third argument is a morality argument. Taiwan is a longtime democratic friend of the United States, and we have a moral obligation to defend the security and safety of Taiwan as that democratic friend. Taiwan is not a vital U.S. interest for the United States. Japan, South Korea, they have been, since World War II, regarded as very important strategic locations for the United States. We have formal security treaties with Japan and South Korea. We do not have any security treaty with Taiwan. Both countries want the United States to keep peace across the Taiwan Strait, yes, but they don't want the United States to provoke China into a conflict. To deal with the China issue and to deal with differences between the U.S. and China over Taiwan, you can't apply simplistic labels. When most people say they want strategic clarity, they want a clearer commitment by the United States to defend Taiwan if it were attacked by China. If you're going to go to war with the Chinese over this issue, it had better be a vital interest of the United States. It's an important interest, it's not a vital interest. Well, among those people who are the most hawkish in viewing China, they simply assume that the Chinese only respect force. They keep pushing until they hit something solid and then they back off. So we have to be that solid thing. Now, what is that thing? It can be a whole host of things that the Chinese would really think twice about in trying to seize Taiwan, but it doesn't include U.S. military intervention, which is not in America's ultimate interest. The alternative approach is to move to an explicit U.S. policy of non-intervention while supporting Taiwan in every other way possible and improving relations with China and reassuring the allies. What does that mean? Say the president woke up one morning, he read my writings on this, he said, boy, this is brilliant, alert the press, I'm going to announce we're not going to defend Taiwan if it's attacked by China. That would not be a good idea. Why? Because people would misunderstand what that means. People could say, well, maybe this does mean the United States isn't going to support us or defend us. So you've got to prepare the ground for moving into that kind of an alternative non-intervention policy. What does that mean? That means you've got to talk to the allies, Japan primarily, but also South Korea, also the Philippines, also allies in Europe, and say to them, we do believe we should be supporting Taiwan. It's a long-term democratic friend. It's not a formal treaty ally. It's not a vital interest. We want to not have military intervention regarding Taiwan, but support it in every other way. And you are not like Taiwan. You are a long-standing, close ally of the United States with U.S. forces on your territory. We recognize our obligation to defend you if you are attacked. None of that exists in the case of Taiwan. That kind of distinction needs to be made with the allies very clearly, and not just rhetorically. That means there has to be closer support for the Japanese, for example, militarily. We should also encourage the Japanese to improve their relations with China. Most of the trends regarding Sino-US relations, regarding Taiwan and other things, are in negative directions. So if the United States is going to move towards beginning to prepare for and then carrying out this non-intervention policy, you've got to have a strong and committed leadership at the top. President and advisors who recognize the importance of establishing a credible deterrent and reassurance policy. You've got to have a sophisticated amount of diplomacy to be directed at our allies, Taiwan, and the Chinese. That's a big challenge. Under this alternative strategy, you would still have in place a series of very major deterrence capabilities and assurance capabilities that I think would still make the Chinese think twice about using force against Taiwan. I think the Chinese would look at the situation and say, oh, I think this is actually going to give us a greater opportunity to be able to engage with the Taiwanese. The possibility of peacefully unifying with Taiwan will actually increase under this, because all of the people promoting war, people promoting military confrontation, etc., they will not be using their arguments any longer and will be able to engage more with the Taiwanese. And Taiwanese could very well be more receptive to engagement with China. Now, both sides would need to compromise in that kind of an engagement. But what it does do, this alternative policy, is it creates greater space for Taiwan and China to engage one another. And that would be definitely in U.S. interest and in Chinese interests to not use force. China represents a range of challenges to the United States, but it still also represents opportunities. That's a dirty word in Washington these days, to talk about China as an opportunity. But it's true. You just have to be very real, open-eyed, realistic in looking at China. The Chinese are not a democracy. They have an autocratic government. They are repressive in many ways, but they also have interests, deep interests, that are shared by other countries and that are shared by the United States. And the challenge is to shape, balance deterrence and reassurance, and also have strong elements of cooperation that produce incentives to avoid the worst casing on both sides. Taiwan became the key stumbling block in the normalization of relations and eventual diplomatic recognition between the U.S. and China. So you had a series of communiques that the U.S. and China signed, much of which dealt with Taiwan. The United States stated that it understood, it acknowledged the Chinese position that Taiwan was a part of China. It did not challenge that position. However, it did not formally recognize that Taiwan was part of China. The U.S. position on Taiwan is that the legal status of Taiwan has yet to be determined. It's allowed Taiwan to be put on the back burner. It has allowed Taiwan to not be at the front of the U.S.-China competition. Normalization saw a basic agreement and understanding between China and the United States that traded two concepts. The Chinese discarded their notion of liberating Taiwan by force in favor of a policy of peaceful unification as a first priority. That didn't mean that they would absolutely never use force if necessary, but our priority is peaceful unification. That was a shift. The U.S., by its part, said, we uphold the one China policy. We acknowledge the Chinese position on this. We will have only unofficial relations with Taiwan. We will not regard Taiwan as a strategic location for the United States. Those two assurances now are eroding on both sides. And that is what's creating the problem over Taiwan. Taiwan is ultimately not a military question. For China, Taiwan is fundamentally a political issue. It's an issue to do with the legitimacy of the nation, the defense of the integrity of the Chinese state. When you threaten the idea of unification by saying, for example, that Taiwan needs to remain permanently separate from China, or Taiwan should be recognized as a sovereign, independent nation like any other nation. You are fundamentally posing to the Chinese the idea that you want to separate Taiwan permanently from China. That political question is absolutely key. The Chinese would look at that as the United States throwing out the one China policy, treating Taiwan as a sovereign, independent nation, and treating it as a security ally, all of which goes against the commitments and the agreements that we reached with China at the time of normalization, all of them.